that day, I live in a dream. I live in a dream.
So welcome to Only Trying to Help, the podcast where we try to help you be helpful to other people. My name is Kate Watson, and I'm always happy when I have a guest, and a special guest today is my good friend, Ro. Ro, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Kate, thanks for having me. My name's Ro. I am a clinical psychologist based out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I see in my clinical practice both a really wide variety of patients, but also a wide variety of, of behaviors that people may think are helpful, but maybe sometimes have the opposite effect.
So we were doing like a little pre-recording, like, okay, what do you want to talk about? And before we were recording this, we decided, it might be helpful to do this conversation for the podcast listeners about alcohol use, social settings when alcohol is present, how to be a good friend to someone who might be trying to cut down or stop drinking. And you were like, Kate, that's my jam. So I'm really
said
glad
it just like that too.
I think you did. I think you said that's my jam.
That's my jam.
And I think people are going to be interested in this, Rose. So I'm going to let you begin with, like, you said there's a particular thing about alcohol use that really like gets you excited to talk about, and this is what your dissertation was on. Do you want to kind of kick us off?
Sure. So, not that I'm like coming at this all Nancy Reagan like or anything like that, but one of the things that people who are in early recovery often really struggle with is how to navigate social situations where alcohol is there. In short, they don't really know how to say no. They feel hyper evaluated. They feel like people are watching their every step. They feel like people are counting their drinks. They feel like it will look strange if they do drink. It will look strange if they don't drink. And so these sorts of social situations can become really loaded. And so what Kate and I were talking about before we started is that for people who have maybe a more neutral relationship with alcohol or substances, they don't really tend to orient too terribly much to like what other people are doing. If you're a person that has, the occasional glass of wine with dinner, or, at a cocktail party or something like that, it's unlikely that you're going to think anything is out of the ordinary if somebody declines, because there's a lot of reasons why people might decline an alcoholic beverage. But for people that are in recovery, particularly early recovery, there seems to be this really pervasive feeling that like all eyes are on them, and that if you say no to a drink, it's because the only reason that you could possibly say no is because you're in recovery, and that is what everybody immediately starts to think about. So that's something that I got really interested in, is sort of like, well, why is it that it seems that so few people have kind of like a neutral relationship with alcohol, and how can we make navigating these sorts of very common situations that really are kind of unavoidable, make them a little bit less loaded and a little bit less anxiety provoking?
That makes a lot of sense to me. So when you say people who have a neutral relationship with alcohol, you're describing that person who's, at a party, has a glass of wine, and they're just maybe like, I guess what most of us might call like a social drinker.
Yeah. Somebody for whom drinking has never caused them any particular problems. They've never, it's never been suggested to them by anybody in their lives, like, hey, I think you drink too much at parties. They've maybe never had consequences like a DUI. They've never been told by their doctor, like, so this is kind of the level of drinking that you just shared with me is kind of creeping more towards the hazardous level. What do you think about that? They would never say it like that. Kate and I would say it like that to somebody because of our training, but most medical providers don't have that kind of necessarily like that kind of autonomous approach. But yeah, like just for people whom have essentially never really had an issue with it.
Sure. Well, and that's helpful, because I think even if you're not, okay, I'm thinking about the people listening, even if you're not sitting there as a person who is trying to cut down on your alcohol use. And so maybe you yourself don't have this concern necessarily. I think this resonates because, listen, even I have sometimes thought to myself, I'm going to go to this party today and I don't really feel like drinking. But if I don't drink, people will wonder why. And
Mm.
I always make the assumption they're going to think I'm pregnant. So
Right.
I'm
Uh-huh.
always like, I better have a drink or everyone will think I'm pregnant. And what you're saying is not really, Kate. No one's paying attention that much.
Well, they're probably not paying attention that much. One, two. I mean, it's. I mean, who cares if you're pregnant, right? And I mean, they can wonder that all day long. And ostensibly, like if they saw you in a social situation 2 weeks later where you were drinking, then they would be like, "Oh, I thought she was pregnant. Yes, she's not."
Yeah.
If they even were thinking about it that much. Or, I mean, the other reasons that people don't drink that have nothing to do with recovery, like oftentimes medication might be like, maybe they're on medication that doesn't mix well with alcohol. Um, they might be driving. Alcohol might give them headaches, et cetera. There's a lot of reasons that don't necessarily have to do with, um, you know, wanting to modify your particular level of drinking. Or, I mean, and I think just kind of like the thing that really gets overlooked, kind of what you said at the beginning, like, I really don't necessarily feel like drinking today. You don't even really need a reason. Um, but people really do feel like that others are sort of like oriented towards that.
Well, as I've admitted, I have felt that way. And so it's sort of
Hmm.
freeing to know that very likely people are not paying that much attention to what I'm doing. Uh,
Yeah.
that's freeing. And again, I think that there are themes here that are helpful to people, even if you're not someone who's necessarily in that early stage of recovery. So I think there's a lot to think about. And I guess, more likely the people tuning into this podcast would be that neutral drinker who's hosting the party, right? and
Hmm.
and they want to be the good helpful friend to folks who are
Hmm.
coming. More likely the people listening right now are the ones saying, well, gosh, if I'm having a social gathering at my house, I want to make sure everybody feels comfortable. So
Hmm.
have you ever kind of looked at that side of the relationship, the perspective of the neutral drinking friend who might just want to be a good friend to the person in early recovery?
Oh, sure, yeah. And I think it's also important to that people want to be to kind of think about kind of like competing desires, which are sometimes competing and sometimes not, which I realize it's just kind of like I just said some like word salady shit to you and I'm sorry. Like, but basically, sometimes the things, people want to be a good friend, like you said, and they want to be helpful to, especially to their friends that are in recovery. They also want to be good hosts. Right. And so the idea is that, like, if somebody comes into your house and like they leave, happy and satisfied, like they had a great time. And sometimes maybe in the case of people who are in early recovery, what they think of as being as a good host may be in conflict with what might be, something that a good friend does, if that makes sense. But sometimes not, right?
Yeah.
Because like maybe being a good host and a good friend means like, you have some like sparkling water or something like that available.
So you're saying that sometimes being a good friend and being a good host are the same thing. And
Mhm.
sometimes they might not feel like the same thing. But one
Right.
idea that I heard you throw out was like making sure you have like a non-alcoholic option and just have it
Yeah.
available. Like not that you need to make a big announcement about it, but
Exactly.
that it's there.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, I mean, I think, one, since you were asking maybe like what would actually be helpful rather than like, like, well, okay, so like Kate and I both have like a mutual friend in common, Terry Moyers. And I think the fact that Terry Moyers is trained in, alcohol research is probably why she does this. But I went to an engagement at her house a couple of years ago, and well, after she was done making snarky comments about the fact that like it was the one social engagement that I chose to attend that year and how she was glad it was at her house, like then she said, "Can I offer you a drink?" And I said, "Sure." And so she walked me to where the drinks were, and there was a wide variety of both alcohol and non-alcoholic options. And she was like, "Just help yourself to whatever you would like," as opposed to like, can I get you a beer, or can I get you a glass of wine, and forcing the person to then say, well, do you have a soda instead, or worse, do you have anything non-alcoholic? Because then if people feel pressured, that might be just something they blurt out, and then they feel like they're making an issue of it, right?
I like that. I'm also, see, this is why I love the podcast, because I sit here and I reflect on times that I wish I could go back to now, because I'm going to tell you, I I like to be a host. I like to host parties,
Same.
and I'm also like sort of stupidly organized, like overly, right?
I
Organized to
like
a
it.
fault. Definitely organized to the point where I make people uncomfortable.
Sure.
And you come into my house for a party, and usually it's like, okay, all of the alcohol is over here to my right. And then
Mm.
all of the non-alcoholic beverages are over here to my left. And to me, that's just organized, right? Like
Ah,
that's just neat and tidy. But
but
now
to
I'm
me, it's segregation, Kate.
yeah. Well, now I'm realizing I'm forcing people to like take a walk one direction or another, and that's calling more attention to things than is necessary. So maybe Terry's approach, and by the way, it would be my dream if Terry listened to this.
Oh, right.
But
What's your problem?
I'm gonna forever now call this pulling a Terry. Maybe in the
Pulling a Terry.
future, maybe in the future I'll pull a Terry, and I
Mhm.
will kind of just leave it all out and available and say, help yourself. You know,
Mhm.
what's mine is yours. Make yourself at home, and that way
Mhm.
there isn't a big issue made out of, oh, did you go to the left or did you go to the right?
Yeah, it's just sensitivity, I think, and like, for even though like what we're talking about is that, like, yeah, people really aren't necessarily paying attention to like what other people are doing. The fact is that people in early recovery do very much feel that, and they feel that sort of hyper evaluation, and they feel that, like, hey, if I grab a LaCroix, everyone's going to be like, why are you drinking that? Why aren't you drinking? But I mean, and with it's kind of understandable, especially if they were kind of like the party person before,
Yeah,
right? That, and all of a sudden they're not drinking, or like they don't necessarily want people to think that they're pregnant, etc. But you know, but being able to do things discreetly and sort of navigate their own recovery without sort of having to disclose prematurely or disclose in a way that they're uncomfortable can often be really helpful for relieving anxiety of being in social situations.
yeah. Well, and again, I'm even thinking about times when like maybe I was trying to lose a little bit of weight or something. And I thought, oh, if I go to this party and it's so and so's birthday and I don't have a piece of cake, everyone's going to be like, why aren't you having cake? You're
Right.
making me think, no, they're not. no,
Mm-hmm.
no one cares if I have cake or
Yeah.
not.
I mean, they
And
might be. Like, let's be clear, like, we don't live in a world where people are always the most respectful. But I mean, the fact remains is that you still have the right to have cake or not have cake. And people may or may not wonder about it, but you still have the right to make your own choice, regardless of what people are going to think. And you also have the right to talk about that or not. You
yeah,
can, you're not required to justify your dietary habits or changes to anybody, if it's not going to be helpful to you at any point in your process.
yeah. I mean, and that's probably the bigger point, of course. This is so interesting to me. And you said that one of the things you really, became interested in was helping people navigate those social situations.
Mhm.
And I just wonder, is there anything else you want to tell us about that?
Well, I think, like, I do think that it's important to have a wide variety of options available. Like if you're a host or something, like Kate, I enjoy hosting. Like I'm a Mexican lady. Like we have very specific ideas about hospitality. Trust me when I say that nothing would be more mortifying than if somebody left my house hungry or thirsty. Like if I ran out of food, I would literally move. Like I would like literally leave town. Like I'd be like, I can never show my face again. So,
If
so
I never hear from you again, I will assume that's what happened.
she biffed it on a party she was throwing. So,
Yeah.
somebody didn't get as many potatoes as they wanted, and she had to go jump off a cliff. Like, We hardly knew her.
Yeah.
So I think having different options available is good. I think also not pressing the issue too. Like, I mean, I think it's what's probably become clear as we've been talking is that like if somebody, does maybe somebody that like normally or that you think would normally like go for like a craft beer or something like that, if maybe they do reach for the Sprite or the Coke or something like that, or the sparkling water, like it's probably clear at this point that like maybe saying like, hey, why aren't you drinking isn't the most helpful thing. But
Mhm.
really just like letting people be, like letting people just kind of like sit and enjoy themselves in in a social environment and sort of get practice at what it feels like to be a sober person in a social environment, essentially.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of what's helpful here is yes, it may be obvious by now that we're discouraging anyone from saying, "Why aren't you drinking?" But what might
Mm-hmm.
be less obvious and worth addressing is you might not you might also want to avoid, a big throwing confetti and wow, look at you.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it
Exactly.
great? I'm so happy
Mm-hmm.
that you're having a Sprite. Like maybe just let the person be.
Exactly. And so one of the things that I discovered when I was doing this line of research is that really a lot of people just want like discretion, exactly like what you just said. So something that can be really helpful is kind of the idea of passing, which is like, say somebody gets like, a Sprite or like a sparkling water, something clear. But if you pour it into a glass with ice and you have like a lime wedge or a lemon wedge, looks just like a gin and tonic, right?
Yeah.
So, and if you already have a drink in your hand, people are unlikely to offer you another one. And so that's something that people have often, I think, a strategy that people often kind of cling to. What's funny is like, there's often this sort of like, well, isn't that lying? Like, well, who the hell cares if it is? Like, and,
Yeah.
and it's so interesting to me that people, I think, feel as though they need to give some sort of justification or almost an apology for like reducing their drinking or being sober. And I mean there's a lot of reasons for that, to get into kind of like in sort of a heady jargony type of place that we probably don't have time for today. But it is something important to think about, that like you do have autonomy, and like even if you aren't working on changing your drinking behavior, you're still okay, allowed to have like a glass of sparkling water with no booze in it if you want to.
Yeah. Well, and when you bring up the folks who say, well, isn't that lying or isn't that misleading or that's not
Hmm.
authentic,
Hmm.
I guess, and you're right, we don't really have time for this, but like
Hmm.
it does make me wonder, it raises the question of who owes whom what. Uh,
Right.
and and maybe no one owes anyone anything, but if there's anyone who has a responsibility here, it's the host, not the guest.
Hmm. Yeah, I think so too. And, and so kind of back to our original um, question of like, how do we help? How do we be like these sort of like well-meaning and lovely people that we want to be, and make our house comfortable for people that are like, that may be trying to navigate something difficult. And I think it's just kind of like meeting them where they are and sort of making it a place that is comfortable for them to be sober. Because one of the other things that we know about alcohol recovery, particularly early alcohol recovery, is that it is isolating. Um, and people feel that they will have to get rid of all of their friends. Essentially, they're going to have to get all new friends. The reality is that sometimes, to some degree, that can kind of be true. I mean, if your friends are all like super heavy drinkers and you can't be around them because it's highly triggering, then yeah, like you probably are going, some of the work that to maintain that recovery is probably going to be in the form of developing your social network and expanding it and finding some sober friends. But certainly finding situations that you can navigate as a sober person without, like you said, having like the three-piece orchestra like celebrating, or like having it being made a friggin' federal case, like, is a lot more comforting, I think, than it to for people with just kind of like a neutral relationship. It doesn't even really register. But for people whom this is genuinely a struggle, it's hard to overstate how comforting that can be.
Yeah. a couple of years ago, I reached out to a friend of mine who, well, I'm hesitating because I don't want to give away his identity. So some things I was
Mhm.
about to say, I'm deciding not to say. But a couple of years ago, I reached out to a friend and I said, "Hey, do you want to get together for beers this week?" And
Mhm.
he said, "I'd love to get together, but I'm not drinking right now." And
Mhm.
and we were texting, so I started to text back. That's no problem. Let's. And then like I drew a blank. I was like,
Mhm.
let's like I thought to myself, beers is what I do with this guy. you know
Mhm.
so I was like, it feels weird to say let's get coffee. We would never get coffee. And it,
Mhm.
it was for me a moment to realize this is not his problem. If I can't think of something to do with him that doesn't involve beer, that's on
Mhm.
me. So that's when I came up with let's get tacos. so
Nice.
so we got
Nice.
together and had tacos, but it really was a moment of pause for me. And
Yeah.
I thought some friends would say, well, I can't hang out with this guy anymore. And I thought to
Mhm.
myself, I need to take a look at myself if I can't think
Mhm.
of what else to put in this blank except beers.
Yeah.
So we got tacos.
And I think you've just hit upon like, one of the most difficult things I think for people in recovery to navigate, which is that literally imagining a life without this being a part of it is just, it's kind of foreign, right? Like, like just the idea of like, you go to a barbecue, you have a beer. Like you go out to dinner, you have a glass of wine. Like, I mean, it's just so woven into people's lives. And so kind of like unfurling that is, requires a lot of kind of like reflection and commitment. And so just finding situations where it's like, it's not so loaded and it's not so, and people are welcoming and people will say like, hey, do you want to get a taco? Because believe you me, that will get me to do almost anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's as the friend here, it was my job to say, you mean more to me than just being somebody I get beers with.
Right.
And
Mhm.
so, if it means I have to do a little bit of work, and by little bit of work, Ro, I mean like 5 seconds of thought.
Right. Mhm.
I have to give 5 seconds of work to this, then that's perfectly reasonable and you're worth it to me. But it also
Mhm.
gave me a moment of compassion for him because I thought,
Mhm.
if I'm frozen for a second on what to do with this guy who I would normally get beers with, imagine what he's going through as he's embarking on this,
Mhm.
life with no alcohol. I thought I only have to experience this discomfort for a few seconds, but he may
Mhm.
be encountering this in many, many situations. And so it
Right.
kind of,
Mhm.
it just gave me a sensitivity toward what, one small
Mhm.
taste of what it might be like for him.
Right. And you chose to kind of like turn toward him and like be welcoming and it sounds like you were like not weird about it at all. Like you weren't like, hey, well, what the fuck's your problem? like why, like this is what we do. Like anything like that. Like, it doesn't sound like, you made an issue of it. You just said, great, let's do this instead. He was probably, I mean, I don't know him obviously. Like, I mean, my guess is that if this was an issue of like trying to reduce alcohol use because of like problems or wanting to be in recovery, then he was probably really relieved that it was just like that's as far as like the conversation went. Because I think that at the heart of it, like people want to talk about it with the ones that they trust and the people in their circumstances, but they want to be able to choose when that happens and they want to be able to choose how to do it, just like any of us, right? Like we
Right.
all have our private lives and we all want to talk about things with our loved ones at our own kind of comfort level, our own our own ability to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I can't read his mind, so I don't know
Right.
this, but I
Mhm.
I wondered if he was breathing a little sigh of relief that I didn't respond with why,
Yeah, exactly. Mhm.
or how come, what happened,
Mhm.
and again, I don't know. I can't read his mind, but I did wonder,
Mhm.
is he going, whew, thank goodness she didn't ask
Mhm.
why, because I don't feel like talking about
Mhm.
this right now. Instead, I just
Right.
say, well, let's do tacos instead. Um,
Mhm.
And I think, that might be a message for the helpers who are listening right now.
Mhm.
Sometimes a helpful thing you can do is just to resist your own urge to pry.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so like when I did, when I initially started this line of research, like, well, I was listening to study tapes from like a women's alcohol study, and listening to kind of like what people's concerns, and sort of, because drink refusal training is part of a manual guided treatment CBT for alcohol use disorders. It usually happens in session 8, which in my opinion is, it's kind of too late. Like, I mean, it's like if you're seeing somebody every week, like ostensibly 8 weeks in, that's probably not the first time it's come up, but and that was kind of one of the things that I brought up whenever I ended up writing the paper. But and a lot of people are just like, well, what if they ask questions? Like, what if they, and it's not even, and so of course, like if it's like a stranger, then like, you kind of naturally bristle. But like, this was a friend of yours, and like, and this is what people were kind of saying, is just like, I don't want to be mean, because they're my friends, and like they mean well, like, but like I also just don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. I'm pausing on that there is something called drink refusal training. Like I'll
Yeah,
bet the listeners are sitting there right now thinking, I didn't even know that was a thing.
yeah,
And and I'm imagining anyone out there who's ever been in this social situation where you're refusing something, whether it's alcohol or the
hmm
birthday cake or whatever.
hmm yeah,
I'll imagine we've all been there where we've kind of wondered, like, why is this so hard for me? And
hmm
it might be helpful to know now that this is like a training people go through. And if you haven't had
yeah.
the training, it's going to be hard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is one of the kind of the active ingredients of CBT for alcohol use disorder. So one of the interventions that is known to be effective. And do you want to hear something really interesting about like this particular role play? Because it's a role play. Basically, when I think it was percent, it was on drinking days. So like doing like the follow-ups at like proximal and distal outcomes. So basically like, a month after they get out of treatment versus like 9 months after they get out of treatment, do those changes kind of, are they sustained? So what was interesting is that the people that actually had this role play, even if it was simple, even if it was just like let's just practice it together, I'll be you, you be me. If they had that role play, then on their drinking days, the mean number of drinks went from like, I think 5 to 3, which is actually like, that's actually the difference between a binge and not a binge. So not only were people drinking less, but they were drinking less harmfully.
Wow. Okay. You said it perfectly fine, but I'm just going to say it back just,
Sure,
because people learn by repetition. So
of
you're
course.
saying people who went through treatment, they
hmm
they may have made some changes either way. They may have made some changes to their
hmm
drinking, but if they had this drink refusal training
hmm
on the days when they did end up having some drinks, it was pretty significantly lower. It was 3 versus
Yes.
5, which is a big
hmm
difference.
It's a
And
big difference. Yeah.
significant in that it really moves them from binge drinking into, I guess, what would you call it? Just drinking?
Just drinking, really. It's it's a drinking day, because like, for, I think for women now, like for, so these are only women in the study, and for women, heavy episodic drinking or binge drinking is 4 or more, and binge drinking is associated with a lot of like, kind of gnarly outcomes. Like people are more likely to assault somebody, be assaulted. They're more likely to experience arrest as a result of their drinking, things like DUIs, things like long-term health problems, et cetera. And I'm not here to like shame anybody for drinking or that, but these are just the things that people report happening that are associated with that kind of hazardous drinking. But the needle moved sufficiently to where on the days that they were drinking less, and they were drinking in a way that was more likely to promote some good, positive, healthy changes for them.
Huh. Now, I feel like then people need to know about this drink refusal training. And maybe not everybody gets access to this kind of thing, but
Mhm.
a little part of me is wondering, like, is that one way you could be a good friend? Like, okay, I'm gonna imagine I'm sitting with my friend, we're having tacos. He's telling me how he's trying not to drink anymore, and it's
Mhm.
been really difficult, and social settings are so hard. Like
Mhm.
it might be slightly awkward, it might be a little weird, but could I offer
Mhm.
to my friend, let's practice refusing drinks.
I mean, you could. The other thing that I have found, and you have a counseling background as well, so you probably are aware of this too. But like, people really hesitate to do role plays because they feel so like awkward and put upon. I get
Yeah.
it, and that's what I tell them whenever I say like, I know it feels weird, I know it feels really artificial, I know it feels dumb. We're gonna do it anyway, and here's why. So I mean, I think maybe just having kind of like a conversation with a friend and just saying like, hey, like if it would be helpful for you to talk about this, or bounce suggestions off of like how to kind of manage this situation. Like I think that's probably the best thing that a friend can do. Because chances are someone is not going to want to practice it with, they like it's pulling teeth to get them to do it with like a mental health professional, right?
Yeah.
But with a friend, like I think that they're probably going to balk, and I get it, but just maybe being a person in their life that they can have a pretty like neutral conversation about it where they know they're not going to get shamed. They know that they're not going to get shit for having problems, basically. I mean,
Mhm.
because that's what people don't want. They don't want to be lectured. They don't want they know they've fucked up in a lot of different ways. I mean, that's what gets people into treatment, when they're like, my life is a mess. And judge said treatment or jail, so I chose treatment. And like, I
Yeah.
mean, it's I mean, I think Hollywood would have people believe that like, it's a much more sanitary process than that, but it's not. The reality is that people make the decision to go into treatment when their lives are in chaos. And so having safe people in their lives that they can actually have a conversation about their fears and their concerns, or not. Maybe they just want to have a person whom they can hang out with sober, but they don't have to make a big deal about it. Just like being a person whom like essentially promotes their sobriety without like, embarrassing cheerleading.
Yeah, not every activity needs to be about your sobriety. It's not,
Exactly.
it doesn't have to be, hey, let's go ice skating because you don't drink anymore. It's like
Hmm.
maybe we could just go ice skating anyway.
Exactly. Right.
Um,
Exactly.
and what I suspect people may do, and they mean well when they do it, but it's probably not very helpful, is something like, oh hey, don't worry about it, just go to the party and drink what you want to drink, and don't worry, don't stress, don't
Right.
be
Hmm.
nervous. We're
Hmm.
often tempted to just kind of throw around these lines like, don't feel that way, don't even think about
Exactly.
it, and that's not
Yeah.
helpful for someone who is genuinely worried about it.
Exactly. I mean, like your feelings are like, your feelings are what they are, We are not our thoughts, but the thoughts, like, the thoughts and the emotions, like they go in places where we don't necessarily always want to go. And anybody that's ever tried to kind of, change how they think of things knows that it's not so easy, right? And so you're stressed out about something with good reason. And so just being told like, well, don't think like that is just about the most unhelpful thing that somebody could say. And it is definitely coming from a place of love. It's definitely coming from a like, I want better for you. I want to help. And this is what I know to be helpful. Even though like, I mean, it's really not. Like most people, like if they stop to think about it, like they don't really like being told that either, right?
Yeah. It brings up my sarcastic side when people say,
Yeah.
"Oh, don't worry about it." I go, "Oh, gee, thanks."
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's just like, well, that's a brilliant suggestion that I absolutely never would have thought of. You got
Yeah,
any more up there, up your sleeve,
yeah.
there, you wizard? So,
My whole life is different now that you've told me not to worry about things. Great.
exactly. Like there's this one episode of Daria, because I'm dating myself slightly and I really like Daria. And she like Daria and Jane get hit on by these two creeps. And the one creep is just like, where have you two ladies been on our lives? And she's like, we've been here in this laundry room waiting for you. And now that you're here, our lives are complete. So,
Ah, that's definitely making the cut and staying in the podcast when this gets.
good.
Yep, yep.
I do love
Anything
Daria.
anything I can do to promote Daria to the next generation.
Oh my God, I was singing the musical episode the other day, and like, and singing the Manly song. Like, I don't know, like the musical episode when Trent's like, it makes me feel like a bearded girl. It's awesome.
Oh, I'm gonna have to find these. Thank you for that trip down memory lane.
Hey,
And
no problem.
and thank you for doing this with me, Ro. I mean, I know you're a busy person, and you're out there fighting the good fight in many ways. And so for you to take the time to do this is really cool. Thank you for doing it.
I don't mind at all. I just I think that I don't know. I really think that like a sober life can be like a joyful life. And that sounds kind of like lame and like, like Pollyanna-ish. I don't mean it like that, but I mean that oftentimes when people are facing trying to change years and years of sustained drinking, it's so overwhelming and they have no idea how to do this. Like all of their whole lives are kind of like in some ways like built around this. And so it doesn't feel like they can ever have a life where that's like, not a part of it. And so and even just like going over to like a friend's house to like sit on the couch and watch Daria, like how am I going to do that? Like, this friend always likes to open a bottle of wine. What do I do? Like, is it going to be weird if I say no? Well, I mean, I'm not here to say like it's never going to be weird, but I am here to remind people like even if it is weird, it's okay. Like if they're your friend, a few moments of weirdness is not going to be like the end of your friendship, and you can let the awkwardness wash over you, which is something I say a lot. Just let it wash, and then
Yeah.
and then go on with your evening and have a good time with your friend rather than like sitting at home alone and thinking about how shitty your life is because you're not drinking anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talk so much about how our relationships with people matter, and they're
Mhm.
bidirectional, right? Like there's two people
Yeah.
involved here. So, if
Mhm.
you are the friend who realizes, oh, we're not just going to be sharing this bottle of wine tonight, you too can let the awkwardness just wash over
Yeah.
you,
Mhm.
get over yourself, and
Yeah.
move on.
Yeah, and because it's not that big of a deal, honestly. Like and I mean, it is and it isn't, right? Like, I mean, for the person offering, it's not a huge deal generally. Like, um, now where I think we can be helpful to our friends and, colleagues, et cetera, that may be dealing with this is, doing the stuff that you and I already talked about, like not pressing it like, oh, like, hey, I'm going to open a bottle of wine tonight, and the other person says, well, actually, I'm not drinking. Like, do you just have some water? Just let it freaking go. Like, yeah, sure. Do you want some ice or are you good with, just like whatever, instead of it, it being like a whole big thing. Because like, no, I mean, putting yourself in the position of like, the cake example, which I think people can also really relate to, like, no one really wants to like have to like have that conversation of like, well, no, I'm actually not eating it because my pants don't fit. Thank you very fucking much. Like, none of your business. Like, people just want to be left alone, right?
I think we're going to call this one Mind Your Business.
Mind your business.
I think that might be a good title for this one. Just mind your business. Just
Mind your
be
business.
you. Let people be
Hmm.
themselves, and if let's go get beers becomes let's go get tacos, I think that's okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like as a side note, that's how me and my partner actually how our relationship sort of blossomed. Like I was living in the Twin Cities at that time and I wanted a taco buddy. And he was like, well, I'll go get some tacos with you. And so we were going to like various taco places in the city and that's how we got to know each other.
Someone said, I'll go get tacos with you, and then you never let him go.
Exactly. Exactly. It was just like fine.
Well, there's another important life lesson. Just make sure you're available for tacos and you'll never be lonely.
Take me in your arms. I don't want to miss a day without you. Let's stay young forever. There is nothing we can't do. And nothing can break us that day I live in a dream.